Alright, so this is for step number 7. And we're in chapter 10. And this is a 4-step process for a 2-sample. So we changed back, this is 2. What's my next decision? Z or T, but today I'm going to go with proportion, so it's going to be Z. What's my next decision? Interval or test. I'm going to tell you today we're just going to do interval. And usually it's for what? So I just write difference in because we've got 2 and we're subtracting them. Alright, so with state, when we dealt with an interval, what did we do? Matt, you might want to get these out because I might kind of want to talk about the differences between the old ones and the new ones. Because we tweaked these a little bit and we could have written it either way, but I want to talk about how it's different and why I did a little bit different.
Which one are we getting?
So let's start with chapter 8 for proportions. I don't remember what number that would be. Number 4. So for that one, what did we not specifically do that I ended up choosing to do later? Defining the population separately and defining P separately, right? I talked about it a little bit within this. Could I have written them separate? Yes. Again, here you can do combinations of the 2. But because we don't need to do that much, I still think it's better to kind of go straight into the sentence. But here, it's also easier to define a little bit ahead of time. So, what can I define within that? Whereas sometimes I do them separately. Okay, if I define things, what do I usually define separate? I define P and I also define what? Can I put those both in one? So I can write so what would be a good word to put here? So I could define population 1 and population 2 separately. I might want to write this population 1. But I don't see the reason to define population and proportion separately here. So then this is just going to be proportion of population to the success. And because I defined this before, where I did not in chapter 8, what we write next gets really, really short. So chapter 8, we're dealing with proportions. Where do I start in my written part if I didn't do that?
We want to estimate.
So usually we would write, we want to estimate what? P. Well, we don't just want to estimate P, we want to estimate what? So we want to estimate the what of the proportion. And now I can literally just write what? If I've already defined these. There's one thing that I have to specify. This mathematically means I'm doing what? There are two ways I can subtract here. So I have to clarify which way I'm subtracting. It never actually matters as far as the problem. It would just be like if you get positive numbers or negative numbers. And I'm just going to write P1 minus P2, specify which. That literally just means either write P1 minus P2 there or write P2 minus P1 there. And then how do I finish it? So just like I said, technically that can be written different, but I think that's the easiest way to shorthand it. Define your P1 and P2 there, because you know you're going to have to reference them a lot throughout. So if you hadn't defined them here, you could never write P1 and P2 in the rest of the problem. That doesn't seem very helpful. And then that way this part can get really shorthand. Alright, plan, what's our first part? My first decision, which we've never had this decision before, is what? 1 or 2, and now we know what it's going to be. So this is a 2 sample. I've already talked through most of this. In this specific one, it is going to be a or difference in proportion. And then again, I still don't care whether or not you write check conditions. What is my first condition? How did we usually write this?
Check that it's randomly selected or assigned to specified.
I don't care how you write that, but there's something we need to add at the end. No, that's salty, but that's word for word everything we've written on every single one of them. That's why I did that. And then so you're going to have to do it for both. Sometimes that one can get a little wordy. I mean, mean, not like crazy wordy, but sometimes it's really quick, or it will be like, stated it was an SRS from both this group and this group, and that would be it. Well, then put random selection. So that one doesn't get that much wordier, even though it's too simple. Alright, so how did we check for normal when we dealt with proportions in chapter 8 interval? In general, how do you always check for normal for proportions? Some version of what? N times P. Which version of P are we using here because it is an interval? P hat. How many things am I going to have to actually check now? 4. So I'm going to write N1 times P what? And then also, and I don't know why, out of habit, I do all my ones first, but it doesn't really matter. And then I do all my 2. So N2 times P hat 2, N2 times 1 minus P hat 2. And then I usually just do that so that all of them are at least 10. What do I also need to do here? What do I write after that? Starts with what? They're at least 10. 1 year, one of my students did this in a way that I really like, and I've started doing it since then. I could sit out here and write they're at least 10. So let's just say we're dealing with A's on the test, boys and girls. So I would have to write there are at least 10 students amongst classes. I would have to figure out what that was for the problem. That were a boy with an A, boy without an A, girl with an A, girl without an A, right? Listing those out. We decided to instead say there are at least 10, whatever individuals are, which is as specific as the problem needs to. And then come up with this really quick little 2x2 that is success in context, failure in context. Here is basically population 1, population 2, but it's individuals. So this would be A, not A, boys, girls. And that's saying I checked all 4 of them, that each of the 4 of them were at least 10, and I like that, and I've used that for the most part from now on. Now, does that mean you have to do that? No, you can still write it out in words, but that just saves a whole lot of writing. And I still have to end with now, I will tell you that all of a sudden, everybody who's done really, really well with conditions will get distracted in this chapter, and I'll have a lot of people leave this off that have not been, because they'll be so concerned with their writing. And usually on this test, I have about 2 or 3 people in each class who just completely don't even do independent because they're so distracted by what's going on up here, even though we've been doing it for the last 2 chapters straight. So make sure that you're doing everything like on a test, even though we've been doing it for a while. So last one's still independent, which is still checking what? 10% condition. Which is still capital N being greater than or equal to 10N, but now we have to put ones with those, and then do another one with twos. And I'm not going to write this part very specific. Because that's one that, depending on what the numbers are, it's the same thing we've been doing. It's just when we have two samples, depending on the wording, depending on if the samples are the same size or not, we're pretty much going to change how we write this every single time, just based off of what wording makes sense. So this is one that all of that might alter every time, and that's fine. So like if we have the same amount, if we have 30 from each population, then we could just say there are at least 300 from this group and this group, and that's it. And that'd be pretty easy, but then it's going to kind of change problem context. But it is still individuals in the population, not successes there. Questions with anything on plans so far? So like I said, nothing's really new material-wise. The newest thing is that one part that I want to refer to. So what do I need now that I have two samples? I need p hat 1 and p hat 2. What else do I need? And because it is a interval, what does the problem give me? And I use that to find what in this particular one? Alright, now I'm going to write our old equation here, but don't, because it doesn't go on the slide. From chapter 8, what is our equation for confidence interval? It starts with what? Alright, so that's not what we're writing here. But instead of p hat, I now write what? P hat 1 minus p hat 2. That's the one that we chose. If I chose to go p hat 2 minus p hat 1 in, should say chose. That's whichever one I chose in state. If this is something like, we know p hat 2 is going to be bigger, a lot of people would rather do p hat 2 minus p hat 1. So just be consistent with whatever you said here is the direction that you're going to use. Alright, so still plus minus. Now, if I'm dealing with two samples, does that change the fact that we have one z? No, because that's still just the distance I go each way. And then, so this is the only thing that actually changes, which is what we talked about at the beginning. So now this is going to be so that's using all of our combined rules from in the past. We have to add, you always add when you combine standard deviations, and you always combine through state of variances. So we squared them both, put them together, and then took the square root to get back to standard deviation. So then when I actually write my answer, don't leave that one there. When I actually write my answer, what used to go in between? For chapter 8, what went here? P. So what will go here now? And that's that same direction, but should these have hats? No, because this is what we're estimating that the population is. P hats, we already know the difference. So those are your parameters. Then we have our lower and our upper. Now, you have to write this stuff down as far as your work, but chapter 10, as far as actually figuring out these numbers, is where I would definitely recommend typing them in your calculator and letting your calculator run the test for you. Because that gets messy doing it by hand. Your calculator is just going to run the test for you just like it always does. And then conclude, should have any issues here. So what does it start with? We are, whatever confidence level number is, percent what? That what? Then what do I need to write with that?
That's the final order.
Whichever one we chose. And then, how do I end that? How do I end that? What do I usually write here? What does this sometimes have? Does this have units? Why not? Because Dylan's proportions don't have units. Sometimes people get to where they convert these to percents. It's fine. I don't care.